You wake to the sound of grinding stone against stone, the rhythmic scraping echoing through narrow limestone corridors that seem to pulse with their own ancient heartbeat. For a moment, you cannot tell whether the sound comes from outside or from somewhere inside your skull. Your palms instinctively reach for the rough, cool sandstone beneath you. Tiny grains flake away beneath your fingertips, like the last remnants of voices that once echoed through this place thousands of years ago. As you rise, the air hits you thick, stale, tasting faintly of myrrh, resin, and something else, something organic and sweetly rotten that makes the back of your tongue twitch. The torch in your hand flickers, casting long, trembling shadows that seem to move independently of the flame. Shapes slither across the walls, shapes that, as your eyes adjust, resolve themselves into carved figures, locked forever in poses that oscillate between devotion and desecration. Hieroglyphs coil across every surface, twisting around scenes you were never meant to see. Not the calm lotus blossoms or noble pharaohs you saw in schoolbooks, but intimate acts etched in precise, delicate lines, the kind of carvings early archaeologists debated erasing out of fear they would scandalize the world. These scenes were hidden deep within the tombs, preserved by darkness itself, as if time conspired to keep these memories buried. You take a step deeper into the passage, and every movement stirs ancient dust into the air. Somewhere behind you, or perhaps beneath you, a low hum seems to vibrate through the stone, a sensation so subtle you can't tell if the tomb itself is responding to your presence. Every civilization leaves behind a legacy, but few leave behind secrets as intimate, as unsettling, and as brutally revealing as these. For centuries, ancient Egypt has been romanticized as a civilization of elegant queens, noble pharaohs, golden tombs, and serene riverside rituals. But the truth, the one written in the corners of walls rarely shown in museums, is far more complex. These carvings tell stories of bodies offered to gods, of rituals disguised as devotion, of practices sanctified by religion, yet rooted in control, fear, and desire. They expose a side of the empire that was whispered about in fragments by ancient writers, denied by modern nationalists, and only recently uncovered by archaeologists willing to confront the darkest chapters of history. You inhale slowly, and the air seems to thicken, almost resisting your breath. The torchlight dances across one particular panel, its carvings sharp, detailed, almost disturbingly well preserved. A young woman kneels before a towering figure of a deity, her face turned away, her hands raised not in prayer but in surrender. Musicians surround her, carved with frozen smiles. Dancers sway in impossible stillness. The scene is festive, yet your stomach knots with unease. This was not celebration. This was spectacle. You walk deeper. Every few steps reveal another narrative, another ritual, another moment where religion and sexuality converged in ways both elaborate and coercive. You begin to understand why early explorers refused to publish many of their findings, why some scrolls were quietly tucked into museum basements, why certain details never made it into textbooks. It wasn't simply because the scenes were explicit, it was because they forced modern viewers to confront a painful truth, that an entire civilization, one of the most admired in human history, wove sanctified violence into its spiritual fabric. Your torch illuminates a new set of carvings. At first glance, they appear to depict women bearing offerings to a god, but the details invalidate any innocent interpretation. Their jewelry, their posture, the shadows of male figures behind them, all hint at something ritualistic and deeply intimate. Some scholars argue that these scenes represent fertility rites. Others claim they depict sacred marriages meant to ensure the Nile's annual flood. A few, more honest or more daring, recognize them for what they are: evidence of ritualized sexual acts performed under divine mandate. The dust beneath your feet softens, as if the tomb floor becomes thicker, muffling your steps. You find yourself descending a slope you hadn't noticed. The walls close in, and your torch guttering low forces your gaze directly in front of you. Now the carvings shift. Where earlier scenes showed ceremonies wrapped in layers of religious symbolism, these new images strip away pretense. Bound hands, tilted chins, unmistakable fear carved into stone faces. You sense you're entering a part of the tomb where the line between ritual and exploitation dissolves entirely. A sudden chill brushes past your neck, and for a fleeting second, you imagine someone standing behind you. When you turn, The corridor stretches empty, silent. Only the torch crackles a lonely, stuttering flame, fighting to illuminate the unspoken truths around you. You continue forward. In the next chamber, the walls explode with color, rare pigments that have clung to the stone despite centuries of humidity and decay. Here, countless figures gather for the Opet festival, one of Egypt's most important religious celebrations. But in this depiction, the festival is not a parade of joy but a theater of power. Women stand adorned in sheer linen, their bodies almost translucent beneath the paint. Priests loom beside them, towering, their heads shaved, their eyes outlined in thick kohl. A single girl stands at the center, a figure so young her proportions seem barely past childhood. She lifts her hands to the god Amun, though the god's form is represented by a very human man, wearing ceremonial regalia. You recognize this scene, because history remembers her, not by her birth name, nor by the life she lived, but by the ritual she endured. Ankhesenamun, Amun, daughter of Akhenaten, wife of Tutankhamun, barely more than a child, yet bound to roles heavier than dynasties. Her story starts here, not in glory, not in gold, but in the trembling shadow of a temple ritual, where priests claimed the voice of gods to justify their authority over her body. You reach out and touch the carved surface, and the stone feels warmer than it should, as if storing echoes of what happened here. The flickering light gives the scene motion, the priest stepping forward, the girl shrinking back, the spectators watching with a reverence that feels indistinguishable from fear. The air grows tight around you. You realize that the deeper you walk, the more the walls seem to urge you onward, not to frighten you, but to force you to witness what history has concealed. Because these stories, however disturbing, were foundations of the empire. They shaped its religion, its politics, its households, its afterlife beliefs. You take one more step, and the corridor opens into a chamber larger than any before. Pillars rise like ribs around you, and at its center, carved in almost lifelike detail, is the beginning of a story that will unravel everything you thought you knew about ancient Egypt. A story of divine marriage, and the girl forced to enact it. Yet even as these rituals unfolded in the open air, not all divine unions were performed before crowds. Some took place deep within sanctuaries lit only by a single oil lamp, where the air was thick with incense and secrecy. The carvings shift again, and you find yourself staring at scenes of smaller, more intimate chambers, rooms designed not for worship, but for containment. These chambers belonged to the temple women who served as vessels of the gods, their lives confined within stone walls that echoed with the footsteps of priests. Inside one carving, a girl sits on a reed mat, her knees drawn to her chest. Her long hair drapes forward, shielding her face from view. A priestess kneels beside her, one hand on the girl's shoulder, a comforting gesture carved with haunting tenderness. But the hieroglyphs tell a different story. The priestess is not there to console. She is there to instruct. She explains the expectations, the posture required, the sacred words to whisper when the god descends into his earthly vessel. The girl's fear, frozen forever in stone, becomes part of the ritual cycle. And still, society believed this was divine work. You reach another section of wall where papyri are depicted being rolled open, administrative records carved into stone. They list the girl's names, ages, family origins, and designations. God's beloved, she who receives the breath of Amun, bearer of the sacred embrace. The titles shimmer with reverence, but their reality was carved just a few inches away. Trembling hands, downcast eyes, young bodies presented for ceremonies they could not escape. Some families offered their daughters willingly, believing it an honor that guaranteed blessings. Others resisted. Yet refusal could bring severe consequences: loss of land, food rations, even forced labor. A father, facing famine, might whisper apologies to his daughter before sending her to the temple gates, convincing himself that the gods had chosen her. But in truth, it was hunger that made the choice. Your torch hisses softly as it burns lower, and the shadows deepen. In the next carved panel, a new scene emerges. A row of girls lining the temple courtyard at dawn. Each one stands barefoot on cool stone, their linen garments thin as breath. The priests walk past them slowly, appraising them in silence. A slight limp, a faint scar, a birthmark. Any of these could save a girl from temple service, yet ironically, such flaws were considered divine imperfections, signs the gods rejected them. For the chosen girls, Beauty was not blessing. It was sentence. One carving shows a child no older than 12 standing before a high priest, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Beside her, a woman, perhaps her mother, watches with a face carved expressionless, either out of resignation or because the artist did not dare portray grief. The priest raises his hand in blessing. The girl is accepted. The next panel shows her a year later, hair braided differently, her posture more rigid. She wears the necklace of a god's wife, a collar of gold beads shaped like lotus petals. The hieroglyph beside her reads, "Consecrated to Amun," as if her humanity has been replaced by a title. You wonder what she felt at that moment. Relief? Pride? Or was there a small part of her that understood what her life would become? A life not owned by her, but by the temple. The festival scenes return again, now in greater detail. You see spectators leaning forward with awe as priests lead temple women onto raised platforms. A musician plays a slow rhythm on a hand drum. A scribe records each movement on a scroll. The crowd believes they are witnessing communion between gods and mortals, an act holding the world's order together. A single misstep could anger the Nile, delay the floods, or invite famine. This belief, this fragile tether between fear and faith, was the mechanism that kept the rituals alive for centuries. When a girl trembled, the people believed she felt the god's presence. When she cried, they believed the deity's power overwhelmed her mortal body. Pain became prophecy, silence became obedience, and obedience became the foundation of the divine. But beneath the ritual's grandeur lay a hidden layer that the carvings only hint at. A small chamber depicted behind the festival courtyard shows rows of mats where temple women rested after ceremonies. Some lie curled on their sides. Others stare blankly upward. A priest stands at the doorway, ensuring none flee. Even the aftercare was ritualized. Oils applied, herbs administered, prayers whispered, not to soothe them, but to prepare them for the next ceremony. As your torchlight moves across the walls, the final carving of this part of the chamber appears. It shows a girl kneeling before a statue of Amun. She is older now, still young, but transformed. Her posture is rigid, her gaze hollow, her hands steady. She is presented not as victim, but as priestess, as divine consort, as holy. This transformation is the darkest part of all, the point when the ritual no longer needs force, because belief or exhaustion has claimed the mind. The torchlight dims. Ahead, the walls darken. The next chamber waits one where the bodies cannot protest, where silence cannot be misinterpreted as divine ecstasy. You take a breath and step forward. The corridor narrows into a steep downward passage, the air growing heavier with each step. Here, the scent changes. The sweet traces of incense and festival oils fade, replaced by resin, linen dust, and the faint metallic tang of tools left too long in the dark. Your torchlight trembles against walls etched with scenes far more unsettling than anything you encountered above. If the previous chambers revealed what the living endured, this one unveils what the dead could not escape. The first carving catches your eye. A body laid out on a stone table, arms beside its sides, legs straight, head tilted slightly, as if still alive. 3 men stand around it, each holding a tool, an obsidian knife, a wooden wedge, a jar of natron. At first glance, it looks like the familiar embalming process taught in textbooks. But the positioning of the men, the angle of their bodies, the disturbing closeness, these details shift the scene's meaning into something far darker. You move the torch closer. The artist carved the body of the woman with a tenderness that feels out of place. The curve of her cheek, the gentle slope of her hip, the detail of her lips. This level of attention contrasts sharply with the men around her, whose faces are rendered with intentionally crude strokes, as if the hand that carved them resisted granting them humanity. This, you realize, is no ordinary mummification scene. A chill moves across your spine as you recall Herodotus's unsettling account, one that scholars dismissed for centuries as exaggeration. He wrote of families delaying the delivery of young or beautiful daughters' bodies to embalmers, fearing indignities would be committed against them. His words were vague, but the implication was unmistakable. And now, carved in ancient stone and confirmed by modern forensic analysis, the truth stands before you. Your torch drifts to the next scene. It is worse. A young woman lies on a table. One embalmer holds her arm, not with reverence but with a possessive grip. Another kneels between her legs. Their actions are carved with deliberate ambiguity, yet the posture makes the implication unmistakable. A third figure stands in the doorway, watching. Perhaps a lookout, perhaps a participant waiting his turn. The hieroglyphs beside them use euphemistic phrases, opening the sacred passages, ritual purification, vessels of the goddess, terms scholars once believed referred to anatomical preparations. But paired with these images, the meaning is sickeningly clear. You walk further. The stone corridor widens into a larger chamber. Here, the walls erupt with scenes of embalming workshops, places where men worked in silence, often at night, surrounded by the bodies of the newly dead. Some workshops are depicted next to the Nile. Others show solitary figures working with only a single oil lamp illuminating the body before them. One carving shows an embalmer leaning over a corpse, his face inches from hers. In his hand is a small carved amulet shaped like a phallus. Modern excavations uncovered similar objects buried in embalming pits. They were once dismissed as symbolic fertility charms, but the scenes around you now reveal a darker purpose. Tools used during violations that priests later justified as rituals to preserve femininity in the afterlife. The deeper you move, the more claustrophobic the chamber becomes. The walls seem to pulse, the air thick with the resinous scent of the embalming mixtures, cedar oil, heated beeswax, myrrh, and something less definable, something that feels like the last exhalation of those who died young. You reach a carving depicting a group of embalmers gathered around a table. A dead woman lies wrapped except for her pelvis, left deliberately exposed. Their hands hover over her not with the precision of surgeons but with lingering familiarity. One man holds a bowl of resin, but his gaze is not on the resin, it's on the body. Another fragment reveals something even more disturbing. The body of a recently deceased girl, her wrappings partially undone. A mark, an intentional mark, is etched on her thigh. The hieroglyphs beside it read, "Chosen for rebirth." But the carving shows no sign of religious reverence, only violation. You recall the CT scans performed in the modern era, scans revealing trauma inflicted after death, unnatural tears, patterns that could not be explained by mummification techniques. Nearly a quarter of examined female mummies bore these silent wounds. The embalmers, working unsupervised for long hours, were given access without oversight. And in a society where the dead could not speak and the living feared divine punishment, violations became secrets swallowed by linen and resin. Your torchlight falls on a depiction of an embalmer slumped against a wall, head bowed, hands covering his face. The hieroglyph above him translates to, "He who fled the light." Records from Memphis mention embalmers drowning themselves in the Nile, men who could not confess their sins without facing execution, yet could not carry the weight of their actions. In another carving, a woman's body is laid out with unnatural care. Her hair is arranged neatly, her face painted with delicate strokes. But her eyes are shut too tightly, her lips parted as if in protest. Resin-stained fingertips are carved around her hips, frozen in a gesture of intrusion. Beside the scene, a papyrus is unrolled. The text reads, "May her beauty remain for the pleasure of the gods." But you know now that gods did not always mean divine spirits. The room grows colder. Your torch dims. As the final series of carvings unfolds, the truth becomes unbearable. Some women were not merely victims after death. They were killed before the mummification even began. The hieroglyphs describe chosen ones who were prepared for the journey before the soul departed. A euphemism. The case of the oleander-poisoned young woman proves it. A fresh body was easier to violate, easier to preserve. The last carving shows her. A young woman, eyes closed, hands crossed over her chest. Her face is peaceful, but the papyrus placed beneath the carving, represented in miniature, shows a priest whispering a prayer into her ear. "Forgive me, for the gods have chosen you." You exhale shakily. Behind you, the stone corridor remains silent. Ahead lies another passage, one carved with images of living women, royal women, trapped not by death, but by blood. You lift the torch and step toward the next chamber. The air changes again as you follow the corridor deeper, leaving behind the silent suffering of embalming chambers. The smell of resin fades, replaced by a faint, powdery sweetness, like crushed lotus petals stored too long in stone jars. Your torchlight lifts, revealing new carvings on the walls. These are different from everything you've seen. The figures stand taller. They wear crowns, collars, and diadems. Their poses are regal, their faces serene, yet there is a strange tightness in their expressions, like sculpted masks trying to conceal something deeply broken. This is the domain of the royal family. You step closer, and the first scene comes into focus. A young woman seated on an ornate throne, her father standing behind her. His hand rests on her shoulder in a gesture that, at a glance, might seem affectionate, but the artist carved her fingers digging into the seat's edge. Her feet, positioned just slightly inward, betray tension. Her name appears beside her, in elegant glyphs. Sitamen, daughter of Amenhotep III, both princess and queen twice over. Royal incest in Egypt wasn't whispered about in dark corners. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't hidden. It was policy, a strategy, a doctrine etched into law and ritual. Pharaohs married sisters to preserve divine bloodlines. Some married daughters to assert absolute control over succession. The gods Isis and Osiris served as justification siblings who ruled together, siblings who created life together. If the gods did it, the royal house believed they must mirror it. Your torch slides across the next carving. A family tree sprawls across the wall like a tangled web. Lines connect brother to sister, father to daughter, aunt to nephew, looping back on themselves like serpents consuming their own tails. Names from textbooks suddenly appear in a different light. Thutmose II, Hatshepsut, Amenhotep II, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun. Beneath their carved faces lies the truth that archaeologists would only confirm millennia later through DNA analysis. Deformities, birth defects, bone diseases, neurological disorders, generations of damage sealed within royal mummies. Your hand drifts to the wall. The stone feels colder than before. Another scene emerges, carved with unsettling intimacy. A young girl sits on her father's lap. She looks barely into adolescence. Her face is carved with smooth, idealized beauty, but her eyes hold none of the joy that palace murals typically paint onto royal figures. Behind them, a scribe records something on a papyrus scroll. The glyphs translate to, "She is beloved of her father. She is pure of blood." You swallow hard. This was how purity was defined in the palace. The fewer outside bloodlines, the better. The purest daughters were the ones chosen to bear their father's children. The lesser daughters were sent to foreign courts to cement alliances. The walls don't show the younger ones who begged not to be chosen, but the Amarna letters clay tablets from foreign kings contain their echoes. One letter from the ruler of Mitanni writes angrily to the Egyptian king, "Your daughters are your wives are your daughters. How are we to understand your house?" You move to the next scene, and the torchlight reveals an older carving, a young princess kneeling before the king. She bows her head while a priest ties a golden sash around her waist, a sash traditionally used in marriage ceremonies. The inscription reads, "She becomes the wife of the two lands. She unites his blood with her own." This was marriage as duty, marriage as obedience, marriage as survival. And not all survived for long. You see another carving, a small, unsettling coffin lying beside a larger one. The larger coffin bears the name Ankhesenamun, wife of Tutankhamun, and also his half-sister. The smaller coffin contains the mummified remains of their unborn daughter. DNA tests conducted thousands of years later confirmed she died from congenital defects, symptoms of generational inbreeding. The walls suddenly feel too close. Further along, carved beneath a frieze of royal crowns, you find a different kind of scene, one not meant for public display. A princess stands before a window at night, her hands gripping the ledge so tightly that her knuckles bulge beneath the stone. Her hair is unbound, cascading like a shadow. Behind her, soldiers approach. The text carved beside her is small, almost hidden. She fled to the land of the Hittites. She sought another fate. They brought her back. Historians know her name, Bakatana. A princess who wrote to a foreign king, begging for sanctuary so she wouldn't be forced into marriage with her father. She was caught before she crossed the border. Her story ends abruptly. The walls say nothing more. Silence is the last line of her biography. You move carefully, your torch revealing the final series of royal carvings. These are the most disturbing of all. They depict the consequences of royal incest in clinical detail. Children born twisted, carried by nurses with expressions of forced neutrality. infants lying motionless in swaddling cloth, royal physicians surrounding babies with misshapen skulls, bowed legs, fused spines. Next to one carving, a papyrus is etched into the stone. It contains instructions for a midwife. If the child cannot breathe, open the nose. If the legs do not straighten, bind them with splints. If the skull is soft, anoint with oil and pray to Hathor. This was royal medicine, not healing resignation. And in the center of it all is a single figure carved with haunting accuracy, Tutankhamun. His frame appears delicate, shoulders uneven, foot twisted inward. The artist did not exaggerate. For once, he carved the truth. The boy king who died at 19 carried the full cost of centuries of incest in his bones. Your torch grows dim, shadows lengthening around his carved figure. The chamber seems to hold its breath, an entire dynasty suspended in darkness, their tragedies etched into stone. You turn toward the next passage. Ahead lies a new world within this tomb, not one of queens or priests or embalmers, but of ordinary girls whose pain was elevated into ritual, girls chosen not for blood, but for purity. The next chamber pulses with darker carvings still. You tighten your grip on the torch and step forward. The air thickens as you enter the next chamber, so much so that your first breath comes out shakier than you expect. The scent here is different. Sharp, metallic, tinged with incense, but unable to mask something beneath it. Something coppery, something human. Your torch reveals carvings that at first seem ceremonial dancers. Lotus blossoms, priestesses kneeling in prayer, but as the light spreads, the scenes shift into something far more harrowing. You are standing inside the domain of ritualized defloration. On the first wall, a line of girls stands barefoot on a stone courtyard. Their dresses cling to their small frames, made of linen so thin it's almost transparent. Their hair is braided with care, adorned with beads that mark them as offerings. Every pair of eyes is downcast. Some girls clasp their hands tightly in front of them. Others hide trembling fingers in folds of cloth. Above them, the inscription reads, "The Chosen Blossoms," a chilling title for what awaits them. The next carving shows temple priestesses preparing the girls. They wash them in sacred pools, pouring cool water over their shoulders, combing oils through their hair, painting their eyelids with kohl. The tender gestures look almost maternal, but the murals betray the truth. The priestesses' faces have no softness. Their eyes are trained ahead, hollow with experience. They are not comforting the girls, they are conditioning them. You step closer. The engravings grow more specific. Girls sit in a small chamber, their backs straight, hands on their knees, while an older priestess teaches them the posture they must hold during the ritual. Another panel shows a child being instructed on how to suppress her voice, how to bite the inside of her cheek, how to breathe through panic, how to keep her eyes lowered even when her vision blurs with tears. These lessons were passed down like sacred craft. Generations of women taught to prepare the next generation for the losing of their childhood. A cold shiver moves across your spine. The next wall depicts the selection ceremony. A high priest stands on a raised dais, holding a staff topped with a carved lotus. Before him, the girls kneel in 2 rows, their heads bowed. The priest walks slowly among them, choosing with a gesture a raised hand, a nod, an outstretched staff. Those he touches rise. Those he ignores exhale silent relief, their shoulders sagging ever so slightly. Chosen meant sacrifice. Not chosen meant survival. Your torch moves forward, and the scene shifts into something darker. The festival crowds appear again, but here their faces are carved with an unsettling cheerfulness. They watch as the selected girls are led toward the central altar. Musicians play flutes. Drums beat a slow, rhythmic pulse. At the altar stands an older priest, the opener of the sacred gateway. His title is carved beside him, ornate and proud. His role was considered wholly exalted, and what he held in his hands was not a religious symbol, not an ankh or scepter, but a carved wooden object shaped with explicit intent. The ritual begins. The carvings do not hide the violence. They never did. One scene shows a girl, perhaps 12, lying on a stone altar, her fingers gripping its edges so hard the artist carved the strain into the tendons of her hands. Her legs tremble. A priestess holds her shoulders down. Another holds her ankles. The priest stands between them, performing the act that would open the gateway to the gods. The crowd watches. They celebrate. You feel the air tighten around you. The fire from your torch flickers, shadows twisting across the stone, making the carvings seem to move, hands clutching, bodies straining, a child's carved face gasping silently. You turn to the next wall, where several girls lie after the ritual. Their bodies look limp, small, folded in on themselves. Some bleed onto the stone floor. Priestesses tend to them with bowls of herbs and oils, but the healing is functional, mechanical, not compassion maintenance. The hieroglyph beside them reads, "They have pleased the gods." In the corner, a single figure is carved differently. A girl whose eyes, though made of stone, appear unfocused, staring into nothing. Her mouth is slightly open, as if struggling to breathe. The scribe carved a phrase beside her. She has entered the divine madness. The ancient papyri describe the symptoms with unsettling detachment: muteness, shaking limbs, refusal to eat, sudden, frenzied movements. Today, we know these signs for what they truly were: psychological trauma in a world without the language to understand it. Your breath catches as you move to the next series of carvings. A large festival scene stretches across the wall, but unlike the crowded rituals of Opet, this is a mass ceremony. Dozens of girls, lined up, standing in a row before the temple of Min at Koptos. Each one awaits her turn. Some look forward, some look down. A few tilt their faces upward, perhaps searching the sky for courage, for clarity, for escape. But there is no escape. The crowd cheers each time a girl is taken inside. Flowers are thrown. Musicians play melodies meant to drown out cries. The priests walk with a solemn dignity, masking the violence beneath the rhythm of ritual. The next carving shows the darker truth. Some girls never stand up again. Their bodies are carried out through a side door, wrapped in linen, faces covered. Their deaths are carved without ceremony, without grief. For them, the ritual became an offering in the most literal sense. A final panel catches your eye, one different from the others. Hidden in the corner, carved with faint lines that nearly fade into the stone, is a simple lotus flower. Beside it, a single phrase: "When the lotus seekers come, run to the river." A warning, a code, a whisper passed among mothers who tried to hide their daughters when temple scouts came searching. Resistance existed, quiet, fragile, desperate, but rarely successful. The chamber draws in around you, heavy with the weight of centuries of stolen childhoods. Ahead, the final passage of this tomb waits, a place where the rituals of the living extend into eternity. You lift your torch. The next chamber opens into a world where even death was not release. The chamber before you widens suddenly, as though the tomb itself exhales after forcing you through suffocating passages of pain. The ceiling arches high, painted with stars that flicker in the wavering torchlight. For a moment, you almost forget the darkness you've walked through until the walls begin to reveal themselves. At first, the carvings appear almost celebratory, rows of women dancing, musicians beating drums, clouds of incense billowing upward. But as your eyes adjust, the truth unfolds like a shadow creeping from behind a painted screen. This is not a festival of joy. It is a festival of obligation. The walls explode with scenes from Bubastis, the great temple of Bastet, where once a year thousands of women transformed into sacred prostitutes for 3 days. In the carvings, women stand at temple gates, their arms extended toward approaching men. The hieroglyphs above them read, "Those who serve the goddess." But the faces etched into the stone betray exhaustion. Eyes hollowed, mouths drawn thin, postures rigid with something closer to resignation than devotion. You can almost hear the echoes of Herodotus's shock as he wrote of these rituals centuries ago. "No woman may refuse any man." The words now stand carved in stone, confirming what he saw. A line of men approaches in the next panel. Egyptians, Nubians, Libyans, Persians, foreigners, and locals alike. Each holds a small pottery token, one side bearing the head of Bastet, the other depicting explicit imagery corresponding to the act purchased. Archaeologists found thousands of these tokens beneath the temple floors. The walls here illustrate them being exchanged, dropped into baskets, counted by scribes like grain or livestock. Not offerings, receipts. The torch reveals another panel, this one quieter, a small room inside the temple. A girl sits on a woven mat, her hands folded in her lap. She could be 10, maybe 11. She wears the collar of a god's wife, though her posture suggests anything but empowerment. Beside her, an older woman writes a letter on a scrap of papyrus. The scene is carved with unusual care, as if the artist wanted to preserve not just the ritual, but the words themselves. You lean in, reading the tiny glyphs. It is a message from one prostitute to her sister. I have served 37 men this month. I pray the goddess will release me. My body aches. My heart has turned to stone. A temple official stands nearby with a register, not watching the girl, not comforting her, but tallying numbers. Because sacred prostitution was not only ritual, it was industry. One that funded temples, paid priests, purchased livestock, and built monuments. The more extreme the ritual, the deeper the temple's coffers grew. You move further along the wall. Now the carvings depict a different kind of ritual, one not of the living, but of the dead. A woman lies on a funerary bier, her body freshly washed. Her face is painted, her hair arranged with meticulous care. But the most disturbing detail lies between her legs, a carved object wrapped in linen. The inscription reads, "Preserved for use in the field of reeds." The afterlife. In Egyptian belief, the soul needed a complete and functional body. But for women, functional extended far beyond anatomical preservation. The pyramid texts speak openly of female spirits serving male gods, male kings, male ancestors performing sexual duties for eternity. The walls show this with chilling frankness. Women posed beside phallic objects made of ivory or stone. These were buried between their legs, not for symbolism, but for perpetual accessibility. Another carving shows a mummified woman being positioned by embalmers. Her legs are arranged apart, her pelvis elevated. The resin drips around her like dark honey. The inscription above this panel is the most explicit yet. She is prepared for pleasure in the afterlife. Your stomach tightens. This wasn't merely a belief, it was instruction. Across the chamber, another series of images depicts the sacrifice servants who accompanied pharaohs into death. Young women, their necks marked with ligature lines, were buried alive or strangled to serve as eternal concubines. In one carving, a girl kneels beside a pharaoh's coffin, her hands bound. Beside her, the glyph simply reads, "She follows." Not by choice, by decree. Further along, the walls show the psychological impact on the living. Letters carved into stone, perhaps copied from real papyri, record women begging the gods, "Let me be old, let me be forgotten, but do not let me be beautiful in death." Beauty meant danger. A beautiful corpse meant access not just by embalmers, but by the spirits waiting on the other side. Your torchlight dims, and the flickering shadows make the carvings appear to shift. A festival at night appears next. Priests chanting around sacred lakes, reflections shimmering on the water as men and women engage in ritualized acts, the community believed essential for cosmic balance. The mingling of aristocratic women, temple prostitutes, and foreign captives creates a blur of bodies, offerings, and desperation. Children born from these encounters were raised as temple property, their very existence part of a cycle that repeated for centuries. And through it all, society did not question the system. Not openly. Marriage contracts listed temple service as justification for a husband's release. Medical texts treated trauma as divine madness. Fathers calculated bride prices with chilling pragmatism. You walk toward the final panel. It is different from the others, carved with clarity, precision, and solemnity. It shows a Roman soldier standing before a temple. Behind him, priests lower their heads. Women look up not with hope, but with disbelief. The inscription is simple. When the West conquered, the rites ended. Octavian's decree. The ban on temple prostitution. The beginning of silence. But the whispers did not stop. Christian missionaries later wrote of abandoned sanctuaries, walls covered in carvings too shameful to describe to children. Local Egyptians avoided certain ruins, claiming the gods inside had grown hungry, restless, corrupted. Your torch burns low, casting one last glow across the chamber. The final carving shows a figure walking out of a dark tomb into the rising sun. Behind them, hieroglyphs swirl like voices carried on the wind. Remember what was hidden. Remember what was done in the name of gods. Remember the cries carved into stone. You step back. You are that figure now standing at the threshold, caught between the shadows of the past and the world you must return to. You exhale, and you carry their stories with you.